Further ado, I've been asked to get through all of these questions in, well, how long have we got? Half an hour. But luckily I don't have to answer them. We have our expert panel on hand. So, I believe in no particular order. I shall start with the questions. So, some of them have been addressed to particular people, others haven't. So, the ones that haven't, if I just ask and you flag up if you would like to answer. So, question 1. How do we establish balance between the needs of wildlife and keeping the environment tidy? Who would like to comment on this one? And do we have the other mic?
It works.
I'll give you the one that works.
It's an interesting question because there are one of the species that's key to the carbon landscapes of willow tit, and it's a species that particularly dislikes tidiness. So, for instance, woodlands where the dead trees are removed, or the bramble and the even Himalayan balsam underneath the trees are key to the species. So that's those scruffy, unloved areas of scrub are its chosen habitat. So I think it's important that we look at what it is that we're trying to conserve in any one area. So obviously we all would like a degree of tidiness and a sort of professionally smart looking habitats and countryside, but there are species that really do appreciate that that sort of scruffy, untidy nature.
Thank you.
Anybody else?
I think one of the things that councils say when you query things that they're doing, which we would regard as being sacrilegious, clearing trees, clearing shrubbery, is that for every one person who contacts the council about protecting habitats and protecting areas that we would regard as important, there are about 20 or 30 who get in touch with them and say, it's a mess, clear it up. And knowing how councillors and other people in local authorities respond, they tend to respond to those who speak loudest and most numerously. So it is a challenge, that it really is a difficult one. What we would think of tidiness is perhaps removing, as we get at Woolston, lots of drinks cans thrown all over the place, and crisp packets and so on. Other people regard uncut grass as being a mess and must be cut, or trees removed, hedgerows removed, and there's a fear of crime comes into it for people who have hedgerows or shrubs growing around their back gardens, and they think thieves or whatever, burglars can hide in them. So they tend to respond to this, and it's a difficult one to actually progress forward and try and get a balance. And I've tried to do it with councils and say, what do we say to these people when they come to us? Well, I said, surely you must have an educational role somewhere to say, then, maybe those things should be retained because, there's a good reason to retain them, and we're not just removing things. We don't want to remove things just for the sake of that, but it's difficult. It's difficult.
So working for a council, I can just counter that, yes. If we do some work at Risley Moss, safety works with trees because we minimise because of breeding assemblage in the woodlands. Safety works with trees. If I'm cutting them down, somebody will say, shameless, you're cutting down a tree. You either, six on the other side are saying, what are you doing with the logs, mate?
Yes.
So there is a balance. Risley Moss is a key, and we do try and educate people because when they come to Risley Moss, it's a beautiful balanced site. You've got wild mossland, we've got the mini moss which we're opening up for people, we've got beautiful woodland, we've got wet woodland where we train as much for nature, and if people want to see a tidy place, we tell them to go to Wallenhall Gardens.
Yes.
which is slightly different, because people do respect. We find when young children get into a wild area, they love it, and they start to understand. Going to Walnall Gardens, it's a park, pop and crisps, so that's the way we try and balance in Bonton.
Great stuff. Hang on to it because it's coming that way. So maybe phone up the council and complain things are too tidy and it can't be ecological enough. So while we're on the subject of Risley Moss, this question was actually addressed to the Yoda of Moss. To restore Risley Moss, how long will it take?
Well, when you're 900 years old, maybe it's a blink of an eye. But no, seriously, we're basically at the moment in the process of restarting natural processes, which will eventually lead to the development of bog. And we're starting to see some of the early signs of some of the indicator species like crossleaf heath, cranberry, sundew, Andromeda, bog rosemary starting to come back in, which are all good signs that it's moving in the right direction. But basically we have to grow about 30 centimetres of sphagnum peat to reform that active layer. It's called the acrotelm. It's basically the surface layer of the bog, which basically undergoes the process of forming the peat, which is the whole thing about bogs is the formation of this peat. So we're probably looking at maybe 50 to 100 years to restart that properly. There's already some areas are going back to active bog, but it's a long process. To grow a metre of peat takes 1,000 years. So that's the time frame that I'm looking at things on.
Awesome, thank you. So if you could pass the mic to Mark, please, Mark Champion. A question about willow tits. How can we encourage them? How do they move from their original nesting site once fledged? And how long do they live for?
Well, I think we were, like most small birds, they live up to about 3 years. There will be some record somewhere for 4 or 5, but 3 years would be a normal lifetime. They are a species that only moves 500 metres generally in its entire lifetime from where it was hatched in its little nest. So it's really vital that scrub woodland corridors or scrub corridors are maintained through the GM wetlands or the carbon landscape, because that is the only way they can move. We've been doing studies and you can follow those corridors. And they're under pressure from sort of tree planting. If it's canopy trees, ashes and oaks, they dislike that as much as they do sort of Tesco's car parks and things. So it depends what sort of things are going on in the corridor and maintaining those linkages through the landscape. And it gets us back to them needing those scruffy grey willow, goat willow type hedges and corridors. But the great thing is they don't need massive widths of it, so we can have quite nice riverine corridors or field hedges, so it's relatively easy to maintain those, but with the pressure from house building and so on. And it's the hidden pressures as well. So there's this idea of the woodland along the M60, and it worries me slightly. I mean, I hope I can influence the people who plant it, but if that was all to become a new forest of oaks and ashes, that would be yet another pressure on the habitat.
Wonderful, thank you. So, a couple on hayfields. Can heavily fertilised hayfields be returned to natural grassland? Over what time frame? And why does hay cutting work? And are there plans for more meadows in Wigan? So the first was, can they be returned to natural grassland and over what time frame?
It would be possible if you invert the soil, so you could deep plough to a depth greater than the current agricultural process. So that would bring up some less fertile soil. The other thing is that given a length of time, you could convert them, because by removing the hay crop, you're constantly removing the fertility. So it would take longer, and you'd go through a longer weedy period with docks and nettles and things. But over time, the removal of the hay would actually remove the fertility. So there's been some heathland converted at Minsmere in Suffolk, and if you can do it from a cornfield, a barley field, so if you can do it from that to take it to heath, you could certainly do it to a hay field. It's where the opportunity, because obviously a highly fertilised cereal field, to convert it to hay, somebody's going to have a value to that field. So if it would be available for our works, that would be another story. How much would it cost to purchase the land? But yes, it definitely would be doable. It would be quite an interesting project. We've probably currently got all the land available via sort of Wigan Council and land we've bought in grassland management at the moment. So it is about looking for greater opportunities, and are there opportunities, elsewhere to create grassland habitats, hayfields.
Great. And the last one on hay meadows, taking it a bit more generally. Hay meadows have been sources of biofuel for green natural gas. Is this compatible with great ecosystems?
Well, currently there was one last question was on the other one as well, was the why does hay cutting? It's like any process, agricultural process, any ecological process. If you're consistent with it, you'll get an outcome. So it's keeping it consistent gives you the outcome. It works because by removing the grass, you are making the field refresh every year, so it keeps it nice and fresh, and that allows the flowering plants and grasses to come up. What you would probably need to do is get a lot more grass. Once they're productive, these fields, in terms of biodiversity, the productivity in terms of biomass, as in grass amount, starts to reduce. So we're not getting that many bales off currently because we're farming it for ecology and the flowers. So I'm guessing that you would need so many fields that you would probably struggle to make any sort of fuel with it. And at the moment it is actually going into the agricultural process, so it's sort of a win everywhere at the moment.
Thank you. I'm going to ask some lesser specific and some harder questions now. How much of a danger to the wildlife of the carbon landscape is fracking? Who would like to take that one?
That's
I'll have a go if you want.
Yeah, thank you.
I think fracking is something that a lot of people are opposed to. But to me, the fundamental reason why we shouldn't be fracking is because we should be keeping fossil fuels in the ground. But when you examine the opposition that there has been to fracking, I mean, I live in Preston and very close to fracking sites there. The real opposition in the rural areas has been on completely different grounds, like traffic. And I think the reality is that the actual threat from fracking to wildlife, apart from the fact that each of the sites takes up about 1 hectare, and there are quite a number of, they're expected to be multiple fracking sites across the area. So each time you have a fracking site, you're effectively removing one area of some kind of habitat. Apart from that, I don't believe that the fracking poses a direct threat to wildlife. But Lancashire Wildlife Trust has finished up objecting to fracking, and one of the grounds was also on the disposal of wastewater from the sites, because the fracking process generates a highly saline backwash water, I think they call it. And what to do with that is it's quite difficult. It certainly can't go into a local watercourse. There's obviously risks of spillages from it. But things like contamination of the aquifers, although there are risks there, I think these are much lower, and the threat to wildlife from those is also much lower. So yes, I think there are risks, but we're not talking about horrendous risks. But that particular, rather technical risk of what to do with the wastewater is one that I don't believe they have currently got an answer to, and at the Preston sites they're actually tankering the waste away large distances just so that they can get the experimental side done, and then when they come to the operational side they'll say, oh, we'll find a solution to it somehow. Anyone else?
Indeed. Anyone else want to present any other point of view?
Oh, that's good.
That's good.
Oh, agreement. Should the carbon landscape develop ecotourism?
I'd like to answer that. Well, I think that the development of ecotourism is a fantastic opportunity for the carbon landscape, indeed for the whole of Greater Manchester. And if you look at comparable areas, and for example the trough of the Forest of Bowland, there are people who come to see birds there from the other side of the Atlantic. So this is, it really is a genuine opportunity. But even from, within the country, I think there are people who will come to visit sites like Woolston Eyes and the Wigan Flashes because of the fantastic bird interest. And this can do a great deal for the local economy. And that's why I said earlier on that I thought the Mosslands were currently 20 years behind the Flashes. The Flashes are just one of the projects in the carbon landscape. In fact, now whether it actually manages to go ahead during the timescale is another matter, is a visitor centre for Wigan Flashes. And I think that would be fantastic, because what the Wigan Flashes do lack currently is a sort of visitor infrastructure. So the more you have of that, and the more you're able to manage the visitors who come to it and make sure that you don't get too much pressure from visitors, it is a fantastic opportunity. And yes, and then people will come, and then you've got all the things that visitors want. They want to perhaps stay a few nights, and there's opportunities then for pubs and accommodation as well. So yes, I absolutely think we should be promoting the whole of the carbon landscape, and all of the local authorities should actually have plans for ecotourism, and they should see it as a real opportunity.
Yeah, I think when the carbon landscape project was being designed, the carbon trail, which Dave said was so exciting, that's the idea, is to promote the whole of our region. And this golden thread, I think it's called a golden thread now, is it, Lydia? Yes, of the trail with loops going off to other areas, attracting people in to visit each of these sites. It is groundbreaking because it's quite interesting to have Warrington Borough Council working in partnership with the Wigan Council. In fact, there's only me involved with it, it's another issue. But we are slowly getting people on board, but getting people to visit sites and making them aware of the other sites. The visitor centre at the Flashes is in the future. Currently we have the visitor centre at Risley Moss. Hopefully we'll have a digital hub there, which will mean that you can promote all of the other regions within the site close by, giving them information about that. And tying everything in together. So we have people come from Manchester, a guy just the other day and said, this place is beautiful, it's absolutely fabulous. I said, where do you live? He said, well, I just live around the corner, I've never been before. And that happens a lot in Birchwood. So getting this project to promote people, making them aware of it, getting them involved, that's what works, because the more we have of that, the more support there is for environmental causes. It's normally the young children who get excited and drag along mum and dad rather than the other way around. And getting people into new areas in Warrington, such as Paddington Meadows, Fantastic Friends Group, Woolston Eyes. These areas of people we're trying to promote, and some people don't really know about us. tying in with the Flash is going to be fantastic across the region if we're successful.
Yeah, I agree with that, Mark. We get a lot of people coming to Woolston. At the moment, we've got about 10 groups coming from various parts of the country, not just locally. And some of them come every year. We have a group of the RSPB from Birmingham who come up every year in a 48-seater coach, and they trundle over the pothole track down along the ship canal. But they come, and some of them stay, and they come from as far north as the borders with Scotland. And I was in the Hyde one year, it was a year or two ago, and 2 or 3 people came in, and I didn't recognise them, and I said, "Oh, have you travelled far?" And they said, "Oh, we set off at 3 o'clock this morning from South Devon." We'd heard about Woolston Eyes, and of course it's the black-necked grebes that they want to see, because hardly anybody ever sees them in summer plumage, which is what we always see at Woolston. And we get masses of other groups. I think at the moment we've got, as I say, about 15 groups coming this year, from not just locally, as I said, from other parts of the country. And we haven't got a visitor centre because it's being volunteers, and Ash is there all day at the moment. But it is a long-term thing that we need to look at, I think.
So as well with Woolston, I think it suffers because anyone who wants to come to the site, it's quite a bit of an effort.
It
and
is.
Meeting Phil today, he didn't know the site existed, but he'll be visiting, won't you, Phil?
Yes.
And just the Carbon Landscape Project in general, spreading the word of Woolston is going to be fantastic. Getting more permit holders and just getting people interested. A lot of the time, people don't know Woolston exists. In my first week on the job, I called up Cheshire Fire Control, let them know we're having a controlled burn. The woman at the end of the line lived on Fellwall Lane, where Woolston starts, and she didn't know it existed. So it's definitely needed, because there's no way people can just come to Woolston, casually walk on and see how brilliant it is. So it definitely needs a voice for people championing nature reserves like this to get the word out there, the word out there.
What role can volunteers play in hay meadows? I guess I'm giving it to you first.
Well, one of the things that we've done, we volunteer. Most of the work on a hay meadow is obviously done by the farmer with his tractor and equipment, but it depends on the size again of the hay meadows. We have some that are cut by volunteers and then turned and picked up and removed by volunteers. So it depends on the scale. So the ones that we were looking at in the presentation were 70 hectares. But what we have done is when we're spreading the green hay is used volunteers. Because of the nature of the urban site, we can't put stock on and things. So after we put the green hay on, we organised a large-scale game of football to actually tread the seed into the tread the seed into the turf to make sure that it went in, and the same with the yellow raffle. So those sort of things are really key, and obviously the data collection is really important, and again that's where volunteers were really key, because there were 5 times 5 plots per meadow over, for every year. So it's a very busy sort of collection, and it's also quite a lot of key use of volunteers. And the scrub tends to move in, or the hedges overgrow. So there's quite a lot of use for volunteers. And I think, look wider, these projects just couldn't happen without the volunteers. So they are key to just about everything that you've heard about so far this morning.
The project at Paddington Meadows, which is one of the carbon landscape projects, which will be, the main driver is to bring the land into management. Mark is writing the management plan for that. But the volunteers, the main driver of the project was to upskill the volunteers to help them maintain it. Obviously we need football training now, Linda, and maybe a match between Warrington and Wigan. might be a bit violent, so maybe. So yes, it's upskilling the volunteers. So the volunteers at the Paddington Meadows project will be key to keeping that land in order, really. Scrub management, hedge management, looking into further use for the hay management, those will be key things for that project. And because as a council, we don't have all of the resource to continue to do that. So upskilling local volunteers is essential, because this is a heritage project. It's no point us promising, when we design a project, it's no point us promising we're going to create this fantastic thing for you, it'll last a year, and then it's gone. The idea is to put it in place with the management that you can deal with that yourself, manage it, ask for further advice, ask for further assistance, but essentially for you to be able to manage it within your guidelines and the guidelines we produce. So this will go on and on, your knowledge will increase, you'll be able to manage it in other ways, you'll be turning around to us and saying, you don't want to do that, you want to do it like this. So that's pretty key, really.
Sorry.
The chair's not supposed to keep the guests.
Yes.
3 minutes. This looks suspiciously like a quick yes or no question. Are there plans for an osprey nesting platform at Wigan Flashes?
No.
No.
We have thought about it at Woolston.
Okay.
We had one stay for about a week. It was 2016, which we got very excited about, and it actually was fishing in the Mersey nearby. So the potential is there. We'll see. We'll see. Oh, sorry.
Just a quick anecdote on that. When you're managing a mossland or any site, you get some people praise what you do, some people get onto your case. Bird watchers, they don't like me a lot because of various reasons, but slowly they're coming round. But you sometimes have to take the rough, the smooth, and I think Paul once said to me, the thing is, Mark, you can't get it all right. We're developing that mossland. There are birds out there, there's snipe, there's teal, there's 7 hobbies flying over. But no matter what you do, some of the bird watchers will still be on your back.
Yes.
They'll probably phone you up one day and say, I can't believe it, I didn't see the toucan dancing with the crane because the osprey stole the binoculars. This site is rubbish. Where's the wing chat gone? So whatever you do, you're still going to turn it around somehow.
Just say, if we got regular osprey sitting around in a tree on the Flashes, I would be open up for to revisit that one, but not just put a tree up for no reason.
Okay, 2 minutes, 2 questions. Could cranes and white storks be introduced onto the mosslands?
They have visited Risley Moss.
Yeah, they've been on Jack Moss as well. I know we had an agro-environment scheme we set up at Whitegate Farm just over the railway from Astley Moss, and they were on there about 3-4 years back. So they do come through the area every now and then. They are spotted. I suppose we're going to have to get to sort of a critical mass of good quality habitat over a big enough area before it really becomes a viable option.
Again, I think that with crane it would be one that's gradually increasing its range. So let's wait on and see if they find it of its own free will. And the white stork is just being reintroduced in southern England, and again you have to get the habitats right across such a large part of its landscape that I don't think we'd be ready. But it's not one that I'd be inherently against, but it's probably for 20 years' time, not this week.
Just a comment really that it's one thing trying to restore a butterfly like the large heath or Naturagus, because it can only fly, its range is about 250 metres. But when you're talking about cranes, I should imagine they can fly for what, 40, 50, 1,000 miles.
Yes.
So really our job is to get the habitat right, and if we get the habitat right, then most of the things that we want will arrive there naturally.
So thanks. Last question before lunch. I'd like a volunteer to answer the question before I ask it, if possible.
That's easy.
Okay,
Yes.
fair enough. So what are the funding plans for the carbon landscape in the future?
I can answer. Yeah, I can answer part of that question. I don't know whether it's aimed, whether it really means the carbon landscape or beyond the carbon landscape. Because I mean, most of the funding plans for the carbon landscape are already in place, but there is always a need to raise some extra money in terms of match funding. But I think we know where a lot of that is coming from. For example, we're very hopeful that we'll be getting money from the DEFRA Peatland Fund, and that will contribute towards the restoration of Little Walden Moss. And there are many similar ways. But if the question is addressed more widely for the future, and I referred to the Pondscape project as the next Great Manchester Wetland project, the answer is would probably the most likely source would be the Heritage Lottery Fund again, another landscape partnership scheme. But there will always be many other. There will always be an ongoing need for funding. So, for example, I've been trying to extract money out of the Highways England Roads Environment Fund for the last 2 years. Not successfully so far, but I haven't given up. And there are many sources of funding like that come and go. And we've always got to be alert to them and trying to get money out of them.
Wonderful. Thank you all so much for your wisdom. There's a last one here, but I don't think it's a question. It says, Risley Moss has a walk on Sunday the 8th of April. Risley Moss has a walk on Sunday the 8th of April?
That's right, yes.
So, well, thank you all very much. I'm going to hand back to Lydia to close off the morning.